I hope that you are benefiting, enjoying these lessons from the book of Nehemiah. I know it's a strange little Old Testament book from which we are taking our lessons right now, but I hope you're enjoying them as much as I'm gaining a lot from this brief study in the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is charged, as he says, by God to build this wall. But before we get into our lesson this morning, it's going to come from Nehemiah chapter 5. Bert's going to put some phrases on the screen rather quickly. I want you to look at these phrases. They're common, everyday phrases that we all use, and I want you to think about what comes to your mind. Like this first one. They're at the top of their game, and they've hit their stride. They have turned the corner. All those are common, everyday phrases that they say to us that someone has become successful. Someone in their particular field has really become successful. And that's kind of where we are with this wall going up around the city of Jerusalem. All around the city, the wall is coming up, and we learned last week that it had reached half its height because the people were working with all their heart, even though they were criticized, even though they were threatened, even though they grew really tired. The wall had reached half its height, and by the time you get to chapter 5, you know that enough time has passed that it's even higher. The wall is going up. They have hit their stride. They have turned the corner. They're doing well. They're having success. But I want you to consider this truth. This truth is that we as people have a tremendous tendency, a huge tendency to self-destruct. Do you realize that? When we're at the top of our game, when we've hit our stride, when we've turned the corner, we have a really strong propensity, we have a tendency to self-destruct. And there are two primary reasons. There are a lot of reasons why someone would self-destruct, but there are two that I want you to consider this morning. One is pride. Everybody knows what that is. Pride causes people to fall apart, to self-destruct. The other is greed. And it's greed that I want to talk about most this morning. And you're probably wondering, how in the world does this have anything to do with building a wall around the city of Jerusalem? But it does. And greed, you well know, is this intense desire to have more and more. And typically it has something to do with money. And so if we are greedy people, we want more and more money. And yet while we want more and more money, which is so common in this world, do you remember a little statement that Paul made to Timothy? It is so well known that even if you don't know the Bible, even if you never come to church, everybody knows the statement. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, see if you know it. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. The love of money causes people to lie, to cheat, to steal, to kill. The way I better like to say it is the love of money, greed, causes people to just mistreat people. And you say, well, lying to them and cheating them and stealing from them and killing them, that's mistreating people. But it covers far more than that. Greed causes us to abuse people. Now that is the problem at the wall. As you begin chapter 5, that becomes the problem at the wall. They're busy building. They're at the top of their game. It's so amazing. This has been a pile of rubble. And it's not going to take very long, by the way, to build this wall that's been missing for 90-something years. And it's half up. And it's going higher. And yet, there is a famine in the land. As you read the first 5 verses, which we'll do in a moment, you're going to find there's a famine in the land. Many times in Scripture, you read about famine. It's always associated with drought. Ronnie just prayed for our land right here because we're in a drought. I asked Ben a moment ago if he was wearing out his cotton strippers or his pickers or whatever they call them these days. And he said they're not even out of the barn because the cotton, it was too dry. We're in a major drought. But in that day when you had a drought, they not only made some money by selling some crops, which was minor, it was the way they ate. That's the way they took care of themselves. So they had grain fields and they have vineyards, and without rain, they can't do anything. And so the people are getting in really serious trouble, at least some of them, while others are rich and they're taking advantage. And so the wall is being slowed down, if not stopped, because of greed. Now read with me beginning in verse 1. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. And in order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. In other words, we're talking about staying alive. We're talking about survival here. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, our homes to be able to get grain during the famine. Still, some others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards. Although we are the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our own sons and daughters to slavery. We're even to the point we're selling our sons and daughters into slavery. Now, I don't know if anyone here really understands what it is to be absolutely desperate. Things so bad with no options that you're absolutely desperate. But when you are truly desperate, you do really hard things, strange things. Can you imagine this point of desperation? That you're mortgaging your land, your vineyards, your house, to be able to buy grain just enough to stay alive? Can you imagine that when those mortgages come due and you can't pay and you've already gotten the grain, the ones who are wealthy go ahead and take the land back away from you, and so you're losing your land? And can you imagine becoming so desperate that you reach the point where you finally say, well, I have a young son here. He's a good worker. I will sell him into slavery for so long so that you can give us some grain we can all survive to eat. And Nehemiah is hearing this. And Nehemiah has one objective. He has one agenda item, as we would say. He has come to build a wall, and now he's got this on his hands. So I want you to consider Nehemiah's response. Now, it's a long section of Scripture till we get to the point we want to make. But I want you to look at Nehemiah's response. Now, remember, going through the book of Nehemiah is different. You have to look at a lot of scriptures. He's telling his story. He's telling his real life story of what's going on as they're building a wall. And so look at how it begins with his response. When I heard their outcry and these charges that they were making, I was very angry. Now, I understand that too, don't you? Sometimes something happens and you know it's not right, and you get angry. I pondered them in my mind. Now, if you read out of a different version, he said, I paused for a while. I let some time pass. Because he knows what you and I have said scores of times in this auditorium and online. We have said it over and over again. When your emotions go up, now you know what answer. Your intellect does what? It goes down. And so when you are angry, when I heard their outcries and their charges, I was angry. When you're angry, you want to jump in and solve the problem. You're not very smart. You don't look smart, you don't act smart, you don't speak smartly, if you're English, okay? That's why I'm glad Zonel's gone. I mean, I'm sure she's watching this morning. Zonel, I'm really glad you're gone so you don't check my English every day. It's a joke, Zonel. So but anytime passion, emotion grows, don't jump in the middle of something right then. So he steps back and he ponders that for a while. I pondered it for a while. And then I dealt with it. Then I accused the nobles and the officials. Now, in this group of Jews who have returned, they're often called the remnant. There are obviously some that are becoming very poor. And there are some who are very rich. And in desperate times, this old statement occurs that we've used also all of our lives. The poor get poorer, and the rich get richer, because the rich take advantage of the poor. You see what I'm saying? So I charged the nobles and officials, and I told them, you are charging your own people interest? Now they knew the statements of Moses in Deuteronomy. They knew that when you loan money to your brother, to your fellow Jew, you never, ever, ever charge interest. You mean you are charging interest? So I called together a large meeting to deal with them. And I said, as far as possible, we have brought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. I don't know what he means by that. Apparently, they've gone back and they have found Jews that are out there among the Gentiles around the city of Jerusalem, and they bought them back. And now you are selling your own people only for them to be sold back. They kept quiet because they could not find anything to say. You know, when you're told the truth, and you understand the truth, and you understand you're in the wrong, sometimes you just have to be quiet. There's no way I can answer this. I'm at total fault. And so he continues and he says, what you're doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of the Lord to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? Now, you probably should just take that one line and we probably should have just made a topical sermon out of it. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of the Lord? You're taking advantage of your own people How do you think God feels about that, is what he's saying. I and my brothers and my men are lending people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. You can lend them these things, but don't charge an interest. And he continues. Give them back immediately. Now he's talking to the nobles, the officials, the people who have money. You give them back right now their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses. And also the interest we're charging them. 1% of the money, grain, new wine, olive oil. When you charge them interest, 1% sounds like pretty good interest to me, but if you give that money back to them. And the interesting thing is they reply and say, we'll give it back. We will give it back. They have no other answer if they want to be loyal to God. We will give it back. And we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned more people. I summoned the priest and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. Now, you have to fall in love with Nehemiah. Sometimes he reminds me of David. He is so passionate. And he said, I shook out the folds of my robe. He did this gesture. I shook out the folds of my robe. And he said to them, in this way, may God shake you out of their house and possessions. And anyone who does not keep this promise, may God shake you out of houses and possessions. If you don't keep this promise, may God kick you out. That's kind of what he's saying. May God kick you out if you don't deal justly with these people. So may such a person be shaken out and emptied. And the people respond like this. We will do what you say. We will do what you say. In fact, what they say is, amen. Let it be so. Let it be so. So you think about all this little story and you think, how in the world do you make a lesson out of that? And why are you bringing this up? When you have this greed at the wall that's stopping the progress. And here's what I think you ought to know. How we treat people matters to God. And you probably ought to put an exclamation mark behind that a time or two. How you treat people, God is watching. And he pays a lot of attention to it. Now, I'm going to say it like this. Maybe it's a little hard. I don't know. But if we come and we take communion, and yet we've been mistreating people out there all the week, and we're going to do it again this next week, I suspect that God doesn't pay any attention to our taking of communion. And if we drop some money in that little plate back there at the back, and I love how we do that. I love that we don't get up like we used to and pass the plate around, and that way you don't see me giving anything, and you don't think, well, he's crazy, and but I love, we just kind of on the honor system, we do it like that. But if you go back there and you put money in every week, and yet you're out here mistreating people all the time, I doubt that God's very impressed with the money you put there. And you can come to the building every time the building is open. But if you're out there abusing people and not treating people well, do you think it matters much to God that you come inside here? I mean, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's about how you treat people. Are you merciful? Are you compassionate? Are you just with people? I've told you many times about this friend of mine who is a long-term friend now. He was a mentor to me. He's a friend to me. He's been a coach to me. I spent a lot of money with Bob, learning his principles. Bob has a sheet of 100 principles. When we got connected, he found out I had a bunch of principles. That's why we became such close friends. One of his principles is this. He said it over and over again. He said, Kim, when you go into a business deal, now Bob works with big organizations, the Chick-fil-A's of this world. He said, when you go into a negotiation, don't you ever go in with the intent of taking advantage of another person. If you come to a person and you find out they're in desperate needs and they're just trying to unload something and it's too good to be true deal, don't take advantage of them. Bob has the audacity to say to Ken, you tell them, no, you deserve more than this. And Bob says, if you're doing a deal with someone and they got something they really need to sell and they don't know the value of it, and you know the value is worth far more, don't you think, Ken, that God would expect you to look at them and say, I want to buy this, but you're not asking enough money. You're cheating yourself. Let me give you some more. Because he said, everything you do with people in negotiation needs to be in your mind where both sides win and both sides are taken care of. Isn't that foreign to our thinking? Isn't that ridiculous to our thinking? Because I want to get it as cheap as I possibly can because you just got to sell it, and I walk away thinking, what a business deal I've made today. And Bob says to me, I wonder what God thinks when you just took advantage of another person because they had no awareness or they had no choice. Is that making sense to anybody? How you treat people matters to God. And so look at what Jesus said. And everybody knows this statement just as well as the first one I said everybody knows. We call it the golden rule. But look at Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12. It's really a powerful statement. So in everything, not just this or that or some little thing that doesn't matter to you, in every single thing, do to others what you would have them to do to you. So in the day of Nehemiah, I am desperate. If we don't get some grain, we can't eat. And we haven't eaten for 3 days, and we haven't eaten for 4 days. Take my son, take my daughter. We got to be able to survive. And the people are able to do that. Nehemiah says, you ought to look at them and say, if you were in that shape, how would you want them to treat you? The first part of this statement is not the most powerful part. It's the last part. For this sums up the law and the prophets. This sums up everything that God ever said. When Jesus was speaking, they didn't have this New Testament written. They had the old law written, and it was filled with command after command after command. And Jesus says, this one concept says it all. Above all else, it says it all. You just treat people really well. And you treat them the way you would like to be treated. And it's almost like he's willing to say, and he does say it, by the way, to the Pharisees. He says it to the Pharisees really strongly. You do all these little religious things, and yet you don't even treat your parents right who are in need. And you don't do these other things, how you treat people right. and you may come into God harder than it's supposed to be, He says, you better watch out. So the point is, greed is so easy to come by in my life. It's so easy to happen. It makes people cheat and lie and steal and kill. And I suspect some of you in this audience know firsthand how it feels to be cheated and lied to and stolen from because of someone's greed. Well, I can give you a peace of mind about that. God knows every single thing about that, and God will deal with it. And God will deal with it. And even if you are singing songs, weren't the songs wonderful this morning? Weren't the songs energetic and wonderful this morning? And you come and sing those with all your might. And yet you go out and abuse people for your own benefit. I doubt that God was too impressed with your singing with all your might. We are supposed to be a people who live like Jesus. He may have been tempted by things, but it didn't work with him. Not one time in his life did he mistreat a single person. Not one time. To the contrary, every time he found a person who was in need or who was abused, who was treated unjustly, he paused and came to the rescue, whether it was a little child or someone else. That's who Jesus was. And if you've ever wondered about Jesus, really wondered about how he felt about people, you just go to the cross. All you have to do is go to the cross and see the blood trickling down and realize the pain that he's in, and can kind of get his eyes opened to look out and see the people who put him there. And he says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. They don't understand. What? You mean people, a person, could act like that? They didn't know. They didn't understand. And so Jesus says, even in the deepest of pain, they need to get forgiveness. Do you think he treated people right? So the wall is more than halfway done. There's a greed problem at the wall. And Nehemiah steps in and he handles the greed problem, and they say, amen, let it be so, and they keep right on building. And we need to look at how we treat people, as Jesus did. So let's take communion. Center your thoughts on this communion. For just a moment, think, well, at least one little moment. He died for each of us. The blood was shed so we would have forgiveness. And in doing so, he looked out as the audience, the people watching, the audience. And he had kindness in his heart toward them, and kindness in his words toward them. And maybe you kind of speak to God and ask God, help me treat people that way also.